water. We rely on it and interact with it every single day. Here in Wales, our ancestors seemed to have a strong connection with water. Our myths, lore, legends, and folk customs seem to instill the idea that water is that which connects us to the other world, the divine, the magical, the numinous. Whether it be stories of fairy maidens rising from the depths of lakes located high in the mountains, or perhaps folkloric beliefs that certain wells and springs held special powers, powers to heal, to divine, and even to curse. Water was the bridge between our mundane mortal life and that which is seemingly beyond our comprehension. Croeso, welcome to the Welsh Witch Podcast. I'm your host, Mara Starling, and oh, gods, it's been a while, hasn't it? Where have I been, you might be asking? Well, dear listeners, I'm afraid I became rather overwhelmed with the busy nature of life, and the podcast simply fell through the cracks, and for that I apologise profusely. But I thank you for sticking around and for joining me once again on a new episode. Just know that this is all set to change moving into this new year. I'm hoping to reignite this podcast and start releasing regular episodes once again. And yes, it's a new year. Blwyddyn newydd dda. Happy New Year. 2025. A brand new year ahead of us all. Oh my goodness. Let's hope that this year brings us joy, enchantment, and prosperity. This episode that you're about to listen to was originally recorded in June of 2023. Yep. You heard that right. 2023. How awful that I allowed it to take me this long to finally release it out into the world. As such, please keep that in mind whilst listening. This was recorded in 2023, so things may have changed since then. My wonderful guest today is the glorious, the gorgeous, the enchanting Annwyn Avalon. Annwyn is a water witch, a water priestess, a founder of Triskele Rose Witchcraft, an Avalonian Witchcraft Tradition. Annwyn is also an author, and I'm sure very many of you listening will know her from her wonderful books. Some of her books include The Way of the Water Priestess, a personal favourite of mine, Water Witchcraft, and one of her more recent offerings to the world, the Celtic Goddess Grimoire. Oh, what a wonderful set of books. And all of these books are available now to purchase wherever books are sold, of course. Annwyn and I share a love for water, but also specifically of myth and lore connected to water, and the myth and lore native to Wales and, on a broader sense, to Britain as a whole. We have shared several evenings nattering on her Instagram account about lake maidens, mermaids, water horses, and more. So, of course, today, naturally, we will be discussing water within the context of myth, lore, and magic. I've allowed myself to delay getting this interview out into the world for far too long, and so, without further ado, sit back, grab yourself a nice beverage or a panad maybe, and enjoy this episode of the Welsh Witch Podcast. So hello, Annwyn, and welcome to the Welsh Witch Podcast. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. So today we are going to be discussing quite a bit about the magic of water, and we'll get into that in a second. But before we talk about water and water magic and all the ways in which water-based magical lore corresponds with the Welsh stream, the Welsh cultural continuum, because of course this is the Welsh Witch podcast. I wanted to first and foremost just ask, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice?
Oh, a little bit. That's so hard. Okay. Um, my wow. All right. Where to even begin? I've always been connected with water. Um, I didn't really realize how big of a part it played in my life until many years into my adulthood, young adulthood. I grew up in Florida around the beaches, the sacred springs, the rivers, the swamps, and I spent a lot of time in water. And then after I like graduated high school, left home, all that good stuff, I ended up kind of like diving into art and eventually into magic and witchcraft. And I remember kind of opening up a book and like seeing, like, reading about witchcraft and being like, oh my gosh, this is me. Like, this describes who I am. And I actively actually fought it for a long time, but that's a whole story that we won't get into today. But I fought that kind of being a witch. And then eventually I just kind of gave in because it was just so right for me. And as I kind of progressed into that like magic path, and witchcraft path, I started looking back and seeing all of the connections with water and really realized, wow, like, not only is my path witchcraft, but it is a very watery witchcraft. Um, and so at that time, actually, there wasn't anything about water witchcraft. There was um, Dion Fortune's Sea Priestess book. Sandra Keynes came out with her sea magic book a couple years later. But I just remember, like, you would get like a little section of it in like a Cunningham book or something like that. But there was nothing about actual witchcraft and water. And so I kind of started diving in and doing the research myself because I knew that it existed. I just knew it. And so this kind of quest to prove that there was a connection between magic, witchcraft, and water, and that there were legitimate practices, really drove a lot of my early witchcraft practices. Um, and I ended up kind of ending in the realms of course, the Celtic world and Avalon. And all of this has just been like such important influences on my practice. My personal practice at the moment is um, Avalonian, um, water priestessing, and water witchcraft. And so the Avalonian path, it takes on both witchcraft and the priestess path, and my water priestess work actually focuses on, of course, the priestess path, sacred stewardship to water. But I think it's really important to point out that I came to kind of the water priestess path through witchcraft again. Um, I had actually gone through like a year and a day program with Wicca, because, again, at the time that I was doing this, it was the only thing. There was no such thing as the separation between traditional witchcraft, folk magician, and Wicca. If you were pagan and interested in Wicca, sorry, if you were pagan and interested in witchcraft, you were Wiccan. There was not a separation. And then what's interesting is, so I had these great teachers that trained me. And then we kind of see this emergence of traditional witchcraft, and it starts to become really, really popular. And as I looked back on what my teachers taught me and the influences, there was such a heavy emphasis on traditional witchcraft, that I really took a look at that and was like, whoa, like, this is what we've been doing. Like, this is so interesting that they picked up on it and they were working that same kind of magic, and that really influenced me. And I think another really important aspect to point out about this is that um, through witchcraft is really where I started spirit work. And through spirit work is really where I started becoming more public with my priestess work. I think that priestess is like kind of a bad rap today because like there's way back when I started, there was like a heavy emphasis on like, oh, the priestess is just trying to be, you know, controlling everybody. And then like nobody wanted to be a priestess. It was like almost a bad word. And then now it's gotten to a point where some people just wake up and are like, oh my God, I'm a priestess and I'm going to start an Instagram. And, you know, they're like, I brushed my teeth, I'm a priestess. And it was never that way for me, but I always had this, like hesitancy towards the priestess path. And, it was the witchcraft path, the spirit work that really pushed me into the priestess path. And so, what I mean by that is the the spirits that I was working with through witchcraft that were coming to me through, you know, more than just meditation, through you know, dream work, through synchronicity, through my practices, who was showing up actively in my vision journeys, in my meditations, in my interactions with the other world, were all water spirits of some sort or connected with water. And they were the ones that really pushed me into the priestess path. So when I was initiated into my like my first initiation, I went through a ritual initiation with my teachers. Um, gosh, well over a decade. I'm like looking at the date right now and I'm like, well over a decade ago. I went through year in a day program. I went through my initiation and I was initiated as a witch and priestess. That was how they initiated me. That was the titles that they gave me. And I took that priestess word and I tucked it in a little corner, hidden away, because I was so like, I didn't know how I felt about it. It felt like such a heavy word that the priestesses that I really wanted to kind of live up to and be like were so advanced, so amazing. They'd done so much work and I didn't feel like I could be there and do that. And then there was also this kind of I don't know, again, like priestess can get a bad rap sometimes, especially within in the pagan community. And then they were just pushing me, push to be to really work this kind of priestess path and to put this out there. And it was about that time that we see the explosion of the internet priestess with the I woke up and I'm a priestess. And again, I kind of had this aversion to it. And I was like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be seen that way. And the water spirits were like, too bad, so sad. You are going to be, you need to put yourself out there as a priestess. And you have earned the title, you were given the title. This isn't something that you just woke up and chose. There was definitely spirit initiations that had happened along the way as well, to a point where I couldn't run from it anymore. And I really sat with that for a long time. And I was like, how can I be a priestess that I'm proud of? Because I don't want to just show up and be like, everything I do is like priestess practice just because I like the word. And I don't want to be this like authoritative priestess lording over her coven and you will, you know, respect my authority type of thing. And I really sat with that for a really, really, really long time. And I asked the water spirits, like, how do I come to this path from a place of authenticity, from a place of goodness and of right relationship? And the answer was, come to it from a place of service. If you're in service to us, you are our priestess, you are a water priestess, you're serving us. Devote your life to that sacred service to the water, and you'll be proud of the word. You'll be proud of everything that you do. And it's true. It really is.
Oh, marvelous. I think I can relate to a lot of your journey into how you came into the path that you're at now, because for me personally, water was also a huge aspect of my coming into it. Not much by choice, not because it was just something that I loved or enjoyed or tended to feel an affinity for, but just because I lived on the coast. So living on the coast, living on the beach, and having the ocean, the sea right there, not the ocean, the sea, the Irish Sea specifically, right there on my doorstep, it was really impossible not to, like, feel that pull towards the sea and to work with the spirits that surround the sea. And I was very fortunate in that the place I grew up in was loaded. As we know, if you go to Anglesey, you can't kick a rock without that rock being ancient and sacred in some capacity. So there were lots of these glorious burial mounds that were sat literally on cliffs overlooking the sea, and that's where I had my first experiences with working with spirits, with working with other witches, going and meeting up with other witches, and my mentor Julie, she was very much of the sort that she didn't like people who practiced magic indoors. She was very judgy about that, I suppose is the word. I'm being light here. She was very judgy because she literally called people who practice magic indoors predominantly carpet witches, and she would she would drive me out to these like gorgeous cliffs that overlook the sea, and that's where we would do our magic. And one of my favorite places was Barclotiad y Gawres, which is a gloriously huge burial chamber that's on a little cove. It's on a cliff right next to a cove called Porth Trecastell. It's known today locally by any incomers or tourists as Cable Bay, but it's Porth Trecastell in the Welsh. And yeah, that was kind of my introduction. And also, like, I loved mermaids growing up as well. I remember one of the first things I ever told my teachers when I went to primary school was, uh, I love. Well, I said it in Welsh. I was like, "Dwi wrth fy modd hefo mor forwynion, tylwyth teg a gwrachod," which translates to, I'm obsessed with mermaids and fairies and witches. And so, like, that's always been a huge aspect of my introduction to magic, was my love for mermaids and fairies and witches and folklore. And so it's no shock really that water played a prominent role in it. And then when you get deep into the stories that surround the magic of Wales, they're so deeply rooted in water as well, even if only kind of tangentially. Like, for example, you mentioned there that you went through a initiation which took a year and a day. My personal theory is that the whole concept of the year and a day initiation originates with Ceridwen and her story, and how it takes a year and a day within that story to brew the awen, to create the potion of awen. And a lot of people interpret the story of Gwion Bach as being an initiation. He sits there for a year and a day, stoking the fire of the cauldron, helping Ceridwen, and then eventually he goes through this literal death and rebirth, which is what an initiation is, a death and a rebirth, and he specifically goes through it within the goddess as well. She's there, Ceridwen, and he is swallowed by her and then is transformed into this new being who is a completely new version of himself. He's a new person, if anything. He's reincarnated, and he is now much more knowledgeable, much more wise. And there's a theory I have that that's possibly where a lot of these kind of early 20th century practitioners who created these initiatory traditions that we know of today got their inspiration from, this idea of the year and a day. And of course, that is very much associated with Llyn Tegid, the lake in Bala, and the cauldron, of course, the conduit, the holder, the vessel of water. And so there's already those water connotations there. And then one need only look towards the other world and the way in which otherworldly places are accessed by people by water. People get there via lakes, via the sea, via sailing and such. So water has always just been there. So, like, so prominent. And I suppose that leads me to my next question that I had for you, which is that we've talked a few times now. We've had our discussions together. And if anybody does not follow Annwyn on Instagram, I very much recommend it. I don't know how you couldn't. She's amazing and she's everywhere. You must be under a rock if you don't. And Annwyn runs this thing called Water Wednesdays, where she has people come on to talk with her, or she speaks herself about aspects of water magic and the magic of water in general. And I've done it twice with you now, I think, if not 3 times. And we've spoken a lot about various aspects of water within the Welsh tradition. So we both geek out over the legends associated with the lakes and ancient wells and the seashores in Wales. So I wanted to ask you, really, because of the way that we both have this affinity for Celtic mythology and specifically Welsh mythology and magic and folklore with the ladies of the lakes and sacred wells and sacred lakes and such, and cauldrons, of course, have to mention cauldrons. Do you have any specific connection to Wales, and what is it exactly about Welsh legend and lore that inspires you so much?
Oh, that's a good question. All right. So first I have to say I got a new cauldron yesterday. Um, totally off topic, but really excited. I found a huge brass, well, I shouldn't say huge, but I found a very big brass cauldron and I'm very excited about it. So I know, yes, we have a cauldron obsession. But okay, to focus on Wales. So, yeah, actually, like I have like family line through Wales. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. My maiden name is actually Welsh. Um, but it's much deeper than that. I started to, oh my gosh, how do I even begin this? Let's see. So way back when I was kind of going through that year and a day, um, no, I think it was even before that. Um, like you had kind of said earlier, there was this connection with always being near the water and working near the water. And not just in my childhood did I grow up near these kind of watery bodies, but when I lived in Japan, it was on a tiny island and we used to work on the ocean. And then when I did my moon circles, like I used to run moon circles in around like 2009 and 10, I did them on the beach. But there was so it was always a connection with water, but there was just something so special about fresh water. I love the sea, I love the ocean, don't get me wrong, but like it does not speak to me the same way that fresh water does. Lakes and wells, very specifically. And I was going through that year and a day program. I'd been practicing as a solitary witch for years at that point, and then I found some teachers and was like, I really want to formally study witchcraft. And I started working with them. And when you start really tapping into witchcraft, more so than just reading in a book and reading a couple spells in a book and lighting some candles, like really doing journey work, really learning how to cross the hedge and go into the other world. Um, I started having interactions with freshwater spirits. And I didn't even know who they were, what they were. In fact, my name, Annwyn, is not my birth name. It is a name that I chose as a stage name for dance when I was about 19. And it's really funny because I was looking through a like really terrible like 90s style website, which is just nothing compared to what we have today. And there was like I was looking for a list of Celtic names, and I found like Andraste, and I thought that that was so beautiful. And then I found Annwyn. And what's so interesting about it is, like many things in the 90s, there wasn't enough research to get it right. And so it was listed as like meaning like grace or blessed grace or something like that, this name Annwyn. And I saw it and I just remember it kind of like jumped off the page and smacked me. And I was like, that's what my dance name is going to be. And I started using that as a stage name. And it was almost as soon as I started using it that simultaneously I started adopting it as my own. Like it really felt like the name that I was given at birth was just not me. It was this name prescribed to me where I was supposed to be a particular way, and I just wasn't that way. There was nothing that I could do to be that way. And so when I stepped onto stage, I could really be Annwyn. I could really be myself. And at that same time is when I started going through really rough spirit initiations. I really hadn't figured out or trained with witchcraft at this particular point in the story, but I had adopted the name Annwyn, and spirit came in and just kind of beat me over the head several times. I had a lot of really rough back-to-back trauma, and you don't go through back-to-back trauma without walking through the underworld. And that's really, I think, part of some of the first spirit initiations that I was going through. And it's so important because when fast forward several, you know, 5, 6, 7 years at this point, and I started actually studying and really tapping into that vein of witchcraft and learning how to go from this world into the other world, the beings that started coming to me were these beautiful, dressed in white, kind of translucent looking, like lake ladies. And I remember reading stories and like really having all of these, these lake ladies. And I started looking and researching and being like, what are these beings? And I found the Gwaggith Anun, although you probably will say it much better than me. Um, but the Gwaggith Anun were, they are basically the wives of the underworld. They are the Welsh lake ladies. And again, they just kind of like, once I put a name to it, they kind of reached out from the other world and smacked me upside the head and was like, this is who we are. And so I have a deep connection with the Gwaithanoon, with Lake Ladies, with the groupings of 9 well maiden, the groupings of maidens, the well maidens, the 9 maidens of Anun, like these little clusters of otherworldly watery women. And finally, in 2012, I traveled to Llyn Van Fach, which I know I'm not saying it perfect, but I'm so proud of how close I get. So, because you know it's a tough word to say, but I pilgrimaged there, and I didn't realize how far away it was. I didn't realize that you had to walk uphill for like a mile and a half. And so I really wasn't in the best of shape at that time, but I did it anyways. I walked all the way up and I collected my water and I took a nap on the banks of the lake. And I remember I just had this, and I woke up and I started to kind of just go down to the water's edge to say goodbye. And I found these little like clusters of crystals. Not like someone had come and put the crystals in. They were very natural types of crystals. And it was kind of this moment where I was like, oh wow, this seems like a gift, like an item that I can take home and I can work with. I've never seen anything like them in the shops. Like this is not like your quartz crystal clusters. They were just like little tiny formations on the natural rocks that were there. And I pilgrimaged back down. I guess I should say pilgrimaged, but I walked back down, and they changed my life at that point. My whole life changed at that point. Everything that's really, if you go back to my story from a few minutes ago, when I talk about really having the spirits urging me to work with water, to share about water, this all kind of like culminated in this particular trip to the UK in 2012, where they were like, this is it, like we're not only are we going to do some healing work on you, but you're one of us, we are one of you, like we're deeply connected. And still to this day, I have that connection with them, that these lake ladies from the other world are some of the spirit beings that have come to me for a long time and continue to come to me. The only other ones that I really work with that have this like similar connection are the spirits of the wells. And while Llyn Van Fach is not a spring-fed lake, it's a glacial lake. They seem very similar. Like They have a really interesting and compatible energy to them. But again, it's this freshwater water fae. Um, and when I was doing research and figuring out like who these beings were, and I saw that name Gwegthynwn written on paper, I was like, oh, it wasn't that I chose this name. I mean, I did in a way, right? I had to sit down and consciously be like, I will take this name. But it was almost as if it was orchestrated. It was almost as if it was put in my path so that I would pick it up. Um, I had to pick it up, of course, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't be who I am. But I didn't go searching to be like, oh, I really want a cool name that has to do with water or the underworld. It was just like, I need a stage name. And it smacked me, just boom, there it is. Interestingly enough, one of my middle names is Anne. And so it wasn't a huge leap to put this like win on the end of it. It's a bit of a strange story, I think, and it doesn't quite fit maybe popular narratives or how things are supposed to be. But it's how they came to me. It's how we began to be connected. And after I put everything together, I was obsessed. I was like, I will learn everything about you. I went through and started digging through texts. Of course, the Mabinogi is the Lake Lady story from the Mabinogi is one of the most important ones. But I started going through some of the 1800s, 1900s folklore and looking for stories about the Gwegethynwn and finding that there were more. They live in these underworld villages underneath these lakes. Cows are sacred to them, and which we know, of course, from the Mabinogi story. But they also have this righteous anger in some of the later stories when it comes to justice and when it comes to treating the land and the animals in a respectful way. And one of the stories that I put in Water Witchcraft is about the lake lady or the Gwegethynwn and a white cow. And she gives this white cow to a farmer in order to feed the village. And after several years, the cow becomes old, and so he brings it to the butchers to be slaughtered. And no reason other than it was just old. It was still a wonderful cow. Like there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. It just was like, this is what society says. The cow is old. Take it to the butcher. And when it got to the butcher brings down this axe down in the middle of its head, and the cow rears up and destroys the butcher shop. And at that point, the Gwegethynwn, the lake lady, comes out over the top of the cliff, just angry. Like this door opens on the side of the cliff, and she comes out and is like standing on the cliff, like screaming and angry and calling back her cows and calling back the offspring of the cow. And eventually the whole village starves and falls into ruin. I think that parallels a lot of my work around right relationships with nature and treating the water with respect and treating the animals with respect, and not just doing what society tells us to do because so sorry, I think I went off on a side tangent, but but that's my connection with Wales and with the wives of the underworld.
I love how you said at the beginning, you said you have family connections to Wales, but that's not all that there is in connection, that you've had these experiences, that there were things calling you and drawing you. Because I know this will probably be a hot take and people might get mad at me for saying it, but I do genuinely believe that there has to be more. Like, it's not enough, I don't think, to just say, oh, I've got family ties, therefore I'm a Welsh witch. Like, I've got family who live in Wales who are not witches. Just being Welsh in and of itself is not what draws you to these things. You have to be a certain temperament. You have to have a certain love and connection to them. And I love that you mentioned that, because it is something that I think breaks that and this is where I get up on my pedestal. It breaks that obsession that we have nowadays in modern paganism with DNA and genetics, which can lead to dangerous and horrible things. It has to be more. It has to have that deeper connection to you and not be based solely in blood and soil and all of this stuff, which can lead to dangerous things. So I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah, the spirits, it came to me. I had to figure out who they were. And you know, they really it's I don't want to be like I am the chosen one because that sounds like so awful. But for lack of better words here, like they picked me.
mhm,
You know, like I was there on the other side, of the hedge, and they saw me and they were like, that one, we're gonna work with her. Not that I'm special or more special than anyone else, like that's not what I'm saying, but it was, and I think maybe other people can resonate with this, like it's not just that I was drawn to them, there was a mutual magnetism.
mhm.
Like I was definitely being pulled towards them at the same time that they were moving towards me, and we collided, and I said, you know, let's work together, and they were like, yes, this is what we want.
Absolutely. And like the connection with water, like I said in the beginning, I can relate entirely to that feeling of being connected to certain bodies of water. The village I grew up on it's called Aberfraw, for those of you who might know where that is. And of course, up on the Isle of Anglesey and Ismorn. So it was an island, and we had the Avon Frau. So the Avon Frau, it translates to mean like the excitable river. It's just this river that's really excitable and frisky, and it's known for being quite dangerous. And it was always my favorite place to go swimming, which, like, growing up and then being told it's one of the most dangerous rivers on Anglesey, it was like, oh, okay, well, I love swimming there. It's my happy place. And it's known as a most dangerous river, because one of the most dangerous rivers, because of the currents, because it leads into the sea, and the currents and the turns that it has a lot of like deep random crevices that you can fall into. It has these currents and tides that can pull you under, and it's why it's called the excitable river, because it meanders through the landscape in a very kind of fast flowing manner. And it comes originally from a lake up about a mile outside the village called Llyn Coron. Llyn Coron just translates to Crown Lake, and it's called Llyn Coron because Aberfraw was where the last princes of Wales were from. So it's a place that is very connected with the native royal family of Gwynedd of the north of Wales. And Llyn Coron itself, I grew up with stories of. So I've got a book over on my shelves by Aelis Griffiths, and it's called Gwrachod Cymru Ddoe a Heddiw, The Witches of Wales Today and Yesterday. And it's all about the lore surrounding witches within a Welsh context. And there's a bit in that where she talks about how there are two primary meeting places of witches on Anglesey, and that is Mynydd Caergybi, which is Mynydd Tŵr, the mountain in Holyhead, and Llyn Coron, the lake that was near where I grew up. So I've always had an affinity for lakes, and like you, lake maidens as well. And I grew up with stories like the one you mentioned about the maiden with the cow and how she called it back home when the butcher was about to kill it. I think that's from Llyn Barfog, which means bearded lake. And there's this whole story around how people would often go up to Llyn Barfog because it was known as a portal, as a gateway into the other world. And they would try and catch these cows. They would try and catch them and make them their own, because they were these glorious cows that were said to produce the best dairy products, the best milk, the best cheese. So we've got that Llyn Barfog link. One of my favourite lake-based stories is Llyn Cwm, which I think is so I'll give a little spoiler here in the podcast for anyone who listens this deeply into it. I'm currently writing another book, and in that book I do focus a lot on these kinds of stories that are from various rural communities in Wales that are not as well known. And the story of Llyn Cwm is one that I love so much, because there's a lot of stories within a Welsh context of these islands that exist out in the sea. They're called the Green Isles of Enchantment, the Meadows of Enchantment, enchantment. And they're very popular in the kind of Pembrokeshire area, down in the south of Wales, and in the areas between Cornwall and Wales. There's a lot of these stories of these islands that appear out of nowhere. And of course, we have the story in the Mabinogi as well of Ynys Gwales, which is also a real island, but also an otherworldly island because it's a place where you don't age and time doesn't move the same way and such. It's where Bendigeidfran and the group of the Severed Head, I can't remember what they're called now, the the Assembly of the Severed Head, where they stayed for many years with Bendigeidfran after his head was chopped off. But people don't talk enough about how we have also stories of these islands appearing in the middle of lakes as well, and not just out in the sea. They're there also in the middle of lakes. So Llyn Cwm Hwch, which is a lake, I think, I can't remember exactly where it is on maps. I'm terrible with maps. But if you look it up, Llyn Cwm Hwch, it's a place where apparently once a year, every Calan Mai, which is May Day, the 1st of May, there would be a magical rock at the kind of shores of the lake where a door would appear on the rock, and you could walk through this door and it would be a gateway to an island that opened up on the middle of the lake. And this island, it would open up once a year for mortals to come and join in with the fairies at their Calan Mai celebrations. And it was a place that was covered in the most lush herbs, the most beautiful flowers, most aromatic flowers, beautiful fruits that you would never see otherwise in Wales, like almost tropical like fruits that you wouldn't have known about back then. And the one rule of this place that was filled with music and enchantment was you can spend all day there on May Day celebrating with the fairies. You can eat as much as you want, you can drink as much as you want, but you are not to take any of the food or drink off the island. And then, of course, an idiot person ruins it for everyone and takes food off the island, and then they close up shop and they never open up the island again for humans to see. And it's said that you can still hear the island sometimes, but that it's gone and you can't find it. And then the story it's a two-part folktale, because there's another story then from the same lake, Llyn Cwm Hwch, where few years later, after, or about half a century later, after the island in the middle of the lake has not appeared again, the residents of the village below, they want to drain the lake because they're like, oh, maybe the fairies have left some treasure under the lake. Maybe they're gone. They've completely left the lake entirely, and they've left some otherworldly treasures that we can maybe share amongst the villagers. So let's drain the lake. And they build this huge kind of stream that they will eventually get into the lake, where the water will drain out and into another lake lower down. And as they're about to reach the end, when they're building this trench that will guide the water down to this other place, as they're about to break into the lake and cause the water to come down, a massive giant spirit appears out of the lake, like a giant with a long beard, and he threatens them that if they were to ever touch the lake, ever try and destroy the lake again, that he would ensure that the entire village below would be flooded and destroyed. So it's almost like there's this association that these lakes are protected and guarded by the otherworldly forces. And I absolutely love that. I love that we have so many of these stories that are very much telling us that water is sacred, water is special, it's numinous, it's liminal, connected to the other world, and they are also gateways and portals. Because as you say, in the stories of the lake maidens, they're coming out of the lakes, and there's all these stories of people falling into the lakes and ending up in these glorious kingdoms and such. And I think it's amazing as well that you have visited the lake as well and had that experience.
I actually, I love the version of the folktale that you just told, because I hadn't heard that the second part, which is amazing. But I remember, so actually I was teaching a class yesterday, for a water god and spirit master class with Veda Austin, and I actually told that a version of that story that you just mentioned, with like the door opens. The story that I had read, though, it probably is a much more modern version, but the door opens and you go through the door on the side of the cliff and under the lake. Instead of it being like an island, it's more like the village is under the lake itself. and that it wasn't food that was brought out, but a single flower was plucked.
Ooh.
And he put it in his pocket because it was so beautiful, that he tucked this kind of flower in his pocket and snuck it out. And as soon as he exited, the door closed, never to be opened again. And it's just like, are you kidding me right now? One greedy person has ruined it for us all, because I would love to have gone through that door and just smelled the flowers and, experienced that. Of course, it also gives us this kind of insight into respect the rules of the fairy realm. Don't piss off the fae, and don't mess with the water. Like, just don't mess with the water realms in a negative way. If you're going to interact with it, be respectful, follow the rules. And I think that a lot of that translates into the modern world too, and how we treat water and how we treat the planet and the landscape, and how it's suffering because of our human greed, because we want. And kind of this metaphor for like taking a flower, taking a piece of fruit, and just that little transgression has closed off that particular part of the spirit world to us. What else are we missing out on? What else is the world missing out on because we have transgressions that are 10 times, thousands times worse than taking a single flower? We have companies that are just draining the aquifers, draining lakes, draining sacred springs, pumping it, selling it back to us for profit. And I think that we see too, just like in the story with the Gregathanoon, how, oh, you hurt my cow, look what I'm going to basically like flood your village, starve your village, different things like that. I do believe that a lot of what we're experiencing with water and with pollution and with the spirit world being closed off to so many folks, of course, not to witches and seers and mystics and such, but to the world in general, comes from this being out of alignment. We're not in right relationship. Humanity is not in right relationship with the spirit world, with the fairy world, with the water world, and we have to get there, because otherwise we're going to just continue to be closed off, and so much is going to be kept from us as a whole, which is sad. It's really sad.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good moment to turn around and say, if there's any listeners, if there's anyone listening into this podcast episode who might live anywhere along the River Wye in Wales, I want you to look into the hashtag Save the River Wye hashtag online at the minute and see if you can do anything, particularly writing to your MPs and such. I know this is a very weird segue for the Welsh Witch podcast while we're talking about water magic, but I do agree that a lot of our kind of issues today comes from the fact that we do not respect the water. We don't respect it. And the River Wye in Wales at the minute has just gone through so much. There are so many chicken farms along the chicken factories, really, I should say, along the river that have caused pollution into the river and caused it to become one of the most polluted rivers in Wales. And it's a gorgeous river and it houses so much life, or it did at one point. So it's important that we take care of these water sources. So if there's anyone listening on that note of like protecting the waters that live along the River Wye in Wales, or even outside and further afield, and think that you can do something, do check it out and look into it, because I'm currently doing the same, trying to figure out how exactly I can help. But moving on from that, one thing I really wanted to talk to you about was springs and wells and such, something that we, I think, share a passion for. I love visiting holy wells, sacred wells, and I grew up in like I said, in a village that had a lot of water around. We had a well called Ffynnon Bendigaid, which is blessed well, it literally translates to, and it has a history of being a well that was used for divination. So people used to divine via the fish that was in the well as well, in the well. And there was also another sacred well that was up near the field that my uncle used to rent out, and near also the one of my favourite sacred sites in Aberfraw, which is Trwyn. But wells and springs play such a prominent role in folklore and folk magic. There's so much folklore associated with saints. I think a lot of witches tend to overlook a lot of the folklore surrounding wells because of their association with saints. But a lot of the early kind of Welsh saints, they have these associations that almost make them seem like gods or goddesses or druids or some kind of magical folk. And so I think it's worth looking into as well. And one thing that I wanted to specifically talk about was the fact that you have currently moved to Glastonbury, to the Ynys Wythryn, as we say in Welsh, Ynys Wythryn, the Glass Island, and you volunteer at the White Spring. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that experience and why you were drawn to Glastonbury specifically as well.
Sure. So like you, again, I've always had that connection with wells and springs. Growing up in Florida, there was actually a well on my property growing up, and I spent a lot of time at the sacred springs. And we don't have time today, but I had some interactions with actually the spring spirits around age 11, 12, 13 there in Florida. But it was the same trip to the UK that in 2012 that I came to Glastonbury for the first time. I knew that I was Avalonian for many years before that, but this was my first experience of actually getting to come to Glastonbury. And I came because I really wanted to see the Chalice Well, because that's the famous one. And I came to the Chalice Well, and I spent my time, and I had my, my spiritual moments, and it was beautiful, and I loved it. And then I knew that there was another spring. I just didn't quite understand the capacity of what it was. And so I remember kind of walking up Wellhouse Lane, and there was just this building with a door open. And the building is kind of like partially tucked into the hill, the landscape, and you walk into this door and you are inside of a cave-like structure. It's not a cave, but it seems very cave-like. There's no electricity. It's all candlelit. There's pagan altars everywhere. And I walked in, and I remember just like having my breath kind of be like taken away, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." And it was actually in that spring in 2012, I was on my knees in front of one of the altars, just having this moment of like, I can't believe this place exists. That I was like, okay, like what do with all this? I'm initiated, I've learned, I'm educated. Like, what do I do with it? Like now that I've like set out to achieve these goals in witchcraft and magic, and I have, what do I do with it? Besides just a spell here or there, like what do I actually do with it? And it was the White Spring that answered and was like, teach about water magic. And of course it was that same trip, just within days of visiting Llyn Van Vac. So this was all kind of coming at me at once. And so I did. I went home and I put together a class and like a 3-page outline. And I taught about water magic at the Arizona Goddess Conference the following year. And then it kind of just took off from there. I was able to come back again in 2018, and I went back into the spring, and I said, what's next? I wrote the book, I taught the class, and I've written the book, and like, what do I do? And the answer was write the next book, which was The Way of the Water Priestess, which is really about learning how to live in sacred service to water. And then then COVID happened, of course. So I couldn't come back until 2022, almost a year ago. Actually, no, just over a year ago at this point. And once again, I went into the spring and I said, hey, what's next? And of course, this time I was like, it's another book, right? Like, you want me to write another book? You want me to teach more? And the spring was no, it was very clear that I would be moving to Glastonbury. And I was like, that's great, but that's not going to happen. Like, impossible. Like, looking at everything, like it was just impossible. And to keep a really, really long story short, the next morning I happened to meet the financial steward of the White Spring, and we wanted to interview each other, and we exchanged phone numbers. And then finally I came back again that August because I just couldn't stay away. And I came back again, and we sat down and we interviewed, and by the end of it, we had kind of hatched this plan to try and buy Dion Fortune's old property, Chalice Orchard, which was about to come onto the market through the auction. It was about to go to auction, basically. And we hatched this insane plan that I didn't think would work. And even up until like the day that we closed on the property, I still was in like disbelief that the message that I had gotten in May that said, you're going to be moving here before 2023, October, like early October, I was like, oh, I guess this is happening. And 45 days later, I was on a plane and on my way. And the very first thing I did when I got here was walk down to that spring and say, how can I volunteer? Let me help. Let me, like, do you have space for volunteers? And they needed help. It's such a beautiful place, but they're short staffed. And so I got on the crew, and honestly, it's not glamorous. I do a lot of sweeping. I do a lot of scraping of wax. I do a lot of spilling wax on my clothes, a lot of burning my hair accidentally. I used to, like, I was like so excited when I first started because I was like, I'm gonna have my hair down and I'm gonna like serve in the temple and it's gonna be so beautiful. And then the temple was like, let's teach you what real service is and what real temple work is. And if you keep your hair down, we're gonna like keep lighting it on fire. And I would lean over a candle and then my hair would go up in flames. So if you look at a picture of it now, it's not nearly as lush and beautiful as it was a few years ago, but the spring just keeps taking little bits of it. So, you know, I do a lot of, you know, talking to people, giving them backgrounds on the spring, you know, telling people no photos because it's a technology-free zone, which is something that I actually love about it. And tending the altars. You have a lot of people that come in and leave offerings and, you know, holding space for that. And it's amazing to watch on a weekly basis, people walk in and have almost the same exact reaction that I had a decade ago, which was like, they take one step in, they look around, and you can see it take their breath away, and they just freeze, and they're just like, the question that I get the most is, what is this place? And of course, I'll launch into my little lecture about, well, it's a Victorian well house built over the site of a sacred spring, blah, 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 blah. But what's so interesting about it is we have shrines to Gwyn ap Nudd, the fairy king of Avalon, as well as Brigid, with like the maiden version of Saint Brigid or the goddess Brigid. We have the Black Madonna. We have a solar shrine. But there's actually it's closed up now. It's no longer accessible. It's all been walled off. But the back of the shrine to where the back of Gwyn ap Nudd's shrine used to be a tunnel from the well house into the tor itself. And it's so interesting because you'll watch people gravitate towards this like blank wall where there's nothing. And it's like, oh, you can feel it, right? You know, like this is like one of like his shrine is just so magical. It's so powerful. I mean, it's changed my life. Visiting this, you know, this place multiple times has changed my life in so many ways. And it's amazing to get to be in service and watch it change other people's lives as well. And for them to have that just moment of, oh, what have I just stumbled upon? This is the most sacred and amazing thing ever. It is the closest thing that we have in a modern context to a pagan water temple. In fact, it's the only thing, it's probably one of the only working water temples in Europe, in the UK. Of course, we have like in Bali, there's definitely like working water temples and things like that. And of course, an hour north of me is Bath, where we have the ruins of Sulis's temple, but it's not an active holy site in a modern context, meaning we have people coming from all over the world to come to the White Spring, to pray, to bathe, to baptize. When I say bathe, I don't mean like bathing. I mean like to get into the waters for healing purposes, like they would have in an ancient context. Anyways, I could talk about it for like 6 hours, so I'll pause and stop right there.
The only thing I want to add, because I feel like because of our borders that we have nowadays, the way the maps are drawn and such, there might be some people who are listening who would think like, oh, what does Glastonbury have to do with Wales? You know, Glastonbury's in England. But I just want to add into that Glastonbury itself has numerous ties to not only to Wales as a country, to the Celtic kind of culture of Wales, but also to Welsh legend, lore, mythology, folklore. It's very much tied in there. As I said before you started speaking, like we have a Welsh name for it, Ynys Wythryn, which is literally translates to the island of glass. That's literally how it translates, the island of glass. And of course, at one point, it's theorized it was an island, the Tor itself, because of the water levels and such. So we have an idea of why it's called Ynys Wythryn in the Old Brythonic in the Welsh, so the island of glass. But also, in later folklore as well, when it's referred to as Glastonbury or Mynydd Glastonbury, the mountain of Glastonbury in later Welsh sources, it becomes associated with so much to do with magic and the other world and Gwyn ap Nudd and such. So for anyone who might be wondering what those connections are, we have connections, of course, some say very tenuous, to Arthurian legend, which comes later, but then we also have connections to Gwyn ap Nudd as being the king of fairy. We have connections to Glastonbury as being associated with the other world, being associated with fairies in general, and of course with magic as well. So yeah, there's a lot of connections between Glastonbury, and it's somewhere that I have yet to visit. So I want to one day. It's very far from where I am and very difficult to get to because it doesn't have any direct kind of train lines or anything like that. I think last time I looked it up on Google Maps, it was something like, oh yeah, you have to get a train to this kind of town that's just outside, and then you get an hour-long bus from that town to this village, and then an hour-long bus from that village to the next village if I wanted to get there from where I am currently. I don't drive, so unfortunately I'm dependent on public transport, and Glastonbury is not exactly the easiest place to get to when it comes to public transport, but I will get there one day. I remember I held Christopher Hughes accountable a couple weeks back because we were in Coventry together. We were sat in a pub just outside Coventry, after having a lovely Indian food restaurant experience. That was a very interesting restaurant, I will say that much, because it was very intimate and we were all very squished up together. But there was a pub beneath the restaurant, and we went to sit there. And I said to Christopher, I said, "You are a liar, because you promised me that after my book gets released, that in celebration you would take me to Glastonbury, or as Christopher calls it, Glaston Disney, because he sees it as the Disneyland for pagans. But he said, I'll take you to Glaston Disney. We'll fill up about a bunch of bags with books from Courtyard Books. We'll go see the different temples, the different shrines, the different wells, and we'll walk up the tour." And he never took me. It's been a year now, almost.
Oh no, and then I guess it's probably terrible to tell you that he was here on Sunday. And
Yeah.
yes, I got to hold space in the spring so that he could have a private booking.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, just today's what, Wednesday? So yeah, just 3 days ago he was here.
Yeah, for the Druid gathering, wasn't it? The Obod
Yeah,
gathering. Summer gathering, was it?
yes.
Yeah, I was really I really want to get there one day, and I will, especially with my affinity for like Gwyn ap Nudd. It's somewhere
Yeah.
that I do want to pilgrimage to eventually, and I will, even if I have to take several trains and several buses, one day I will get there, and I'll have to come
Castle
meet you
Cary.
as
If you
well.
could get to Castle Cary, it's only a 23-minute drive
Oh,
from
very
Castle
good.
Cary. So I'll just put that out there for you. But yeah, oh, Samhain, I feel like would be so perfect for you to come. In the summer, it's very, yes, very like Glaston Disney. Like it's definitely like kind of wild and colorful in the summer, but it's interesting because in the winter it does the other world overlaps very much with Avalon here, and it's like right now it feels very distant because it's just so active with like so much going on and so many like you know, human everyday types of things. But in the winter it really feels like there's like no separation between this world and the other world. And even some days I wake up and it's like completely shrouded in mist, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Just making me want to come even more. But yes, I will come and I'll come meet you. And I think because we've been speaking now for almost an hour, I will wrap up there and kind of leave it for possibly, maybe we can come back and chat more about water magic, or specifically maybe wells and sacred wells, healing wells,
Yeah,
and cursing wells, of course, because wells have also been known for cursing as well. And we can have a chat about that sometime in future on an episode. But
I would.
before we leave, I was just wondering, do you have anything in particular that you'd love to share? Anything we should look out for? Anything that is coming up for you in the near future?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I've got several things. I'm working on a book that was supposed to be published this year, but it's on pause. I don't know why. So I'll just say like be looking out for something maybe in the fall in the fall this year, next year. Like, I don't even have my cover yet. It's just taking a long time. I don't know why. My other two didn't take this long. So there is another book coming. It's not watery per se, but I can't get away with it. So there's definitely like a thick um mist of water over over it. And then a couple of things. Definitely follow me on Instagram because that's where I post everything. But I do have my Water Priestess training getting ready to relaunch later this summer. And when I say Water Priestess training, it does not matter if you are how you identify, but priestesses, priests, priestesses, even if you don't identify as a priest or priestess or priestess, if you're more of a mystic or like a water wizard or anything like that, like Water Priestess training is something that you can, if you're interested in sacred stewardship, and in being in service to water, it's a great course to take. And it's actually, the first course is actually free. And then I have I've been launching a new set of workshops called the Cauldron of Avalon, and I'm actually the very first one is called The Way to Avalon, and then the next one that's going to be coming out this summer is The Waters of Avalon. So we'll be diving deep into the sacred springs of Glastonbury, which there are more than just 2 or 3. There's several here, and then I think the most exciting thing is in the fall, in early November. I have a brand new offering. It's called Bewitching the Waters Symposium. In the spring, I have my Water Priestess Confluence, where we have a grouping of water priestesses that come together to share about water and spirituality. But that is so, I guess, niche that I wanted to do something in the fall that really focused on folk magic, on witchcraft, on shape shifting, on the other world, on these very like witchy practices, very anything that had to do with folklore and the occult. And so it's called Bewitching the Waters Symposium. And right now we are collecting proposals for presenters, and that will be launching officially November 10th, 11th, and 12th of this year. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more and hearing from a lot of different voices around water, and water witchcraft and folk magic practices, definitely check that out. And you could find that on waterwitchcraft.com.
Brilliant. It all sounds absolutely enchanting. And all the information will be in the show notes. So wherever you're watching this, whether you're or watching, listening, I suppose I should say, wherever you're listening to this, whether it's on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts, check out the show notes down below and all the links to Annwyn's kind of social medias, books, courses, everything that you've just heard about will be down there. And I just want to say thank you so much, Diolch or Galon, for coming here, Annwyn, and talking to us. And I hope we can speak again in future as well.
I hope so. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. What a wonderful conversation with Annwyn, all about water. I just am so happy that this episode has finally made its way out into the world. And once again, I'd like to apologise for my radio silence for over a year. It's been well over a year since I last posted an episode of the Welsh Witch podcast, but hopefully that will all change in this new year. My hope for 2025 is to release at least one new podcast episode every single month, so you can hopefully look forward to that in this new year. The format of the episodes is going to change slightly, so I still have a few more interviews that I already recorded before I had my little hiatus, which need to go out just like this one with Annwyn, so you can look forward to me releasing those soon. Those are all already recorded. All I need to do is quickly edit them and make sure they're okay and ready to go, and then publish them, so they should be no problem. So at least for the next couple of months there will be new episodes of the Welsh Witch podcast releasing. But after I'm done editing and uploading those current episodes that have already been recorded, I will be changing the format a little, and it won't just be interviews from here on out. It's been lovely interviewing people, but the pool of people that I can talk to about Welsh specific folklore, myth, magic and such is very, very small. So aside from perhaps repeating a few interviews, there's only a handful of people that I can think of at the moment that I would like to speak to on the podcast. So going into the future, I think beyond interviews, we'll also have episodes that focus specifically on certain aspects of myth, magic and lore that is specifically within a Welsh cultural context. So you can expect a few shorter episodes from me which focus on a specific element or aspect of Welsh myth, lore and magic, but you'll also see a few more discussion episodes coming up where I perhaps will invite more than one guest. Perhaps we'll have two guests on at the same time discussing something of relevance, and hopefully that tickles your fancy and you will join us here on the Welsh Witch podcast. Thank you, Diolch o Galon, for listening today, for tuning into the Welsh Witch podcast after this long hiatus. Thank you so much to Annwyn for being so patient with me, and of course you can find Annwyn on social media as Annwyn Avalon. Go and look her up. Beyond that, all the links to her socials and such will be available in the show notes below and anywhere that you have seen this on social media. So go ahead and find Annwyn, give her a follow. She posts so many beautiful posts, especially on her Instagram. I very much recommend following her on Instagram. She also hosts Water Wednesdays, where she sits with guests and talks about water and magic and such. So yes, thank you so much. Diolch o galon, blwyddyn newydd dda, Happy New Year, and I shall see you more in 2025. But for now, ta-ra, diolch.